Okay, right. So for just a few words, okay, because I've been asked to give the closing remarks. As scholars of gender, we imbibe the adage that context is all. And we gather today in perilous times. We assemble at a time of bewildering grief, unprecedented global crises, and extreme imperial violence. We're bearing witness to astronomical and egregious global inequalities, the collapse of ideals of democratic voice, protest, international human rights, and the rendering toothless of international law, all unable to stop ongoing genocides. Of course, we've always known that these universal frameworks only worked for a select, dominant, privileged few, but nevertheless, they did provide an ideal by which to hold authoritarianism to account and a design from which to begin working for justice for all. What we have now is the shattering of the illusion that in the face of a genocide, we will not stand alone. We are indeed standing alone. In a recent article for the London Review of Books, Pankaj Mishra writes that never before have so many witnessed an industrial scale slaughter in real time. Yet the prevailing callousness, timidity, and censorship disallows, even mocks, our shock and our grief. It is also a particularly difficult time to be a gender studies scholar and to be a university student and worker. The mission of the university, which is one of speaking truth to power and to holding power accountable, itself has come under attack precisely for trying to carry out its mission and of speaking truth to power and of demanding justice. Edward Said, writing in Representations of the Intellectual, wrote of the constraints, but also of the imperative of speaking truth to power. And I quote him, "No one can speak up all the time on all of the issues, but I believe there is a special duty to address the constituted and authorized powers of one society, which are accountable to its citizenry, particularly when those powers are exercised in a manifestly disproportionate and immoral war, or in a deliberate program of discrimination, repression, and collective cruelty. Nothing, in my view, is more reprehensible than those habits of the mind in the intellectual that induce avoidance, that characteristic turning away from a difficult and principled position which you know to be the right one, but which you do not take." And as we gather here, there are courageous voices speaking up against the ongoing genocidal and colonial violence in the university. Students, faculty, and academic workers are showing the world through putting their bodies and words to urgent action and in the face of militarized violence and assault to demand an end to genocide and scholasticide in Gaza, but also to powerfully argue that insofar as abstract concepts of universal human rights, freedom, justice, and the right to life have any power and any life to them or any energy to them, that power depends on being seized as liberation tools by the oppressed and in showing up for everyone, and therefore not only showing up for the select few each and every time. They are showing us what the universal really means and what universal humanity really means. And as Anjali was saying in the morning so powerfully, what it means to kind of move towards keeping the subject alive and to centering that particular act. Our intellectual gathering today speaks to so many aspects of the crises of our times. We've been through a whole day in which scholars and colleagues have spoken about the various crises confronting us and in which we are inhabiting. In the best tradition of gender scholarship, today's symposium brought together transnational, interdisciplinary work from the social sciences and humanities across different locations and contexts to grapple with some of the difficult questions that confront life worlds in our time. A response to these questions, of course, is always going to be difficult and elusive. and will require taking the very slow, careful, and contemplative time over these. But we are also part of a long chain of feminist scholarship, which has taught us that we have to think on these questions through building communities of scholarship. Trust, struggle, and transformation. We do not think about them alone and in solitude. And it is by coming together in feminist spaces such as this one, we not only think together, but importantly, we also forge ethical practices of community building, of how to live together in freedom, but also in difference, of how to build ethical and political solidarities outside of instrumentalization, extractivism, violence, self-interest, and outside of institutional violence, and how to forge responses to hard questions that are not always only reactive, but also visionary, and which envision alternative imaginaries of world-making in which everyone can breathe and live in freedom. Now, I also know that it's incredibly hard to do this work of thinking, writing, learning, and building solidaristic coalitions when one is constantly under surveillance and attack. As a discipline that both tracks the formation, arrangement, and practices of power, domination, and oppression around the globe on the one hand, while forging strategies, ethical strategies for transformation on the other, gender studies is never going to be an anonymous discipline shielded from the vicissitudes of power hierarchies, not least because it poses a direct challenge to structures of power. Its very existence is a testament to resisting and challenging existing structures of power. However, having said this, this is no ordinary time in global politics. And even though gender studies has, come under attack over the period, of its own establishment and institutionalization that Anya pointed out and walked us through this morning, this time is like no other. Around the globe, right-wing statism and its motley crew of supporters across intersecting spectrums, divides, and political affiliations are successfully and terrifyingly mobilizing anti-feminism, and in particular anti-gender, as its central political and policy platform to not only spectacular political effect, but also deadly consequences. The department has also been through its own set of struggles and difficulties with hostility, attack, targeting of faculty and students, simply for doing interdisciplinary and transnational teaching and scholarship. The Department of Gender Studies, of course, brings together a unique conversation, dialogue, and commitment to transnational interdisciplinary scholarship that traverses the humanities and the social sciences. It is this crisscrossing between the humanities and the social sciences that sets it apart. It is also a department that is at the heart of critical science, social science, and humanities scholarship at the LSE and beyond. I'd also say that it's very important, actually, that the world's second largest gender studies department is housed in the world's only social science university in the world. Its unique humanities and social sciences orientation provides a different direction to social science scholarship, which becomes one not simply engaged in learning about the causes of things or describing how the world works, but also one about imagining visions for living together in the world otherwise, and for living in the world in justice and freedom for all. Departments, of course, take decades and years to establish, develop an identity, and to grow roots. Although I wasn't here at the start of the department's founding, like Marsha, but I also, like Marsha, have been here for at least half of the latter 30 years. And I've been a witness to its enormously exciting and dynamic growth and expansion, and its rise to globally renowned status. The department is also actually the only place I find in the academy, and I have called it my intellectual home. And that is entirely down to the wonderful scholarly community of visitors, visiting fellows, LSE fellows, students, faculty I found on my arrival, and I arrived here as an LSE fellow, and one that we have built together solidaristically and collectively over the years. It's simply extraordinary how, even though we come from such different intellectual traditions, disciplinary training, and methodological orientations, we have worked together solidaristically across our difference to produce scholarship and teaching that truly makes a mark in the world. Having said this, over the years, inspirational and visionary scholars and colleagues across the LSE have put so much into designing a vision for LSE gender and in building it. Being at the heart of LSE's interdisciplinary scholarship has meant that LSE Gender is a hub for gender scholarship across the LSE. And this is reflected in its advisory board, which has representation from across LSE's departments. At the very beginning in 1993, as Anya laid out this morning, it was the advisory board which led on setting up a dedicated space for gender studies at the LSE. Over the years, many scholars and administrators saw the importance of gender scholarship and analysis, and with this vision displayed extraordinary solidarity, commitment, and effort contributing to building the department. And it's this legacy of solidarity and common purpose which continues today with the invaluable work that the advisory board, many of whom were here today, and are still here, I think, continue to do. Over the last 3 decades, feminist scholars and administrators have shaped the department and created a legacy for it. And I want to honor, in this moment, and pay tribute to Anne Phillips, up right there, Diane Perrins, Claire Hemmings, there, and Wendy Siegel, who have been heads of, big applause, everyone. Who have been heads of departments, a couple of them several times, or at least a couple of times, of LSE Gender since 1997. It's really an honor to share this, to be in this room with all 4 of them. And as you've just joined me in celebrating them, but you could do that again, in celebrating their brilliance, their commitment, nerves of steel, foresight, vision, and extraordinary energy. So can I have another round of applause? They've steered the department through some very difficult times, and their work has made it possible for all of us to gather and celebrate 3 decades of gender studies. I also want to honor Hazel Johnstone. As many of you know, Hazel Johnstone was the founding member of Gender Studies at the LSE and one of the 2 original members of the department. The origin story goes, in the beginning, there were 2 people and a dog, and the dog belonged to one of the members. As we celebrate the 30th anniversary, it's hard to imagine that Hazel, almost universally known as the GI guru, that's how she was known, is not present in this room with us to mark the occasion. She was the department's founding member, its institutional guardian. So there are all these people who have done this work of being archivists, of institutional guardian, and she was one of them. She was the department's archivist, its historian, and memory keeper. She was an institution builder, and we honor her memory and legacy as we look at the 30 years of gender studies at the LSE, but also beyond. And I think we have to think about looking beyond, because that is such an important part of what we are doing today. As we honor our scholarly and institutional inheritance, we also look to passing on forward this precious legacy of scholarship, teaching, and feminist institution building to our MSc and PhD students. Many of them who are also here, because they are the next generation of gender studies scholars trained by LSE Gender, but also gender studies scholars who will go across the world and do some of the work that's been done at LSE Gender. In these 30 years, our students have gone into the world working towards a fairer and more just planet. LSE Gender's alumni are not only academic leaders in university settings, but also institutional heads shaping economic, political, and media activities around the world, with many more translating and applying the interdisciplinary intersectional, transnational, and anti-racist knowledge to transform professional and interpersonal engagements across all levels of civil and political society. Finally, I want to express my gratitude to my inspiring colleagues. All of them are spread across the room. My inspiring colleagues, both academic and professional services colleagues, and also to students at the department, and also colleagues and students across the LSE who come to LSE Gender and take our courses. Their wisdom, care, enthusiasm, and steadfast belief in making the university and the world a better place is restorative and energy-giving every day. And now, I think that was a lot of serious talk at the end, right? And now, let's go have some drinks. So I invite you all to a celebratory reception to celebrate 30 years of gender studies.